People rarely take you for granted because of one single mistake. More often, it happens gradually. You give more than you receive, forgive without addressing repeated behavior, remain available whenever someone calls, and continue accepting treatment that quietly bothers you. At first, these choices may appear generous. You tell yourself that being patient makes you a good person. You believe that understanding others means overlooking their behavior, but when generosity has no boundaries, people can begin to treat it as an unlimited resource. What was once appreciated becomes expected, and what was once a favor becomes an obligation. One of the main reasons people begin taking you for granted is that you give too much without clearly defining where your responsibility ends. You may believe that being generous, understanding, patient, and dependable will naturally make people appreciate you more. Sometimes it does, but generosity without boundaries can create a different pattern. When you repeatedly give your time, energy, attention, money, support, or forgiveness without expecting basic respect in return, people can gradually stop seeing those things as gifts and start seeing them as normal obligations. What you once offered freely becomes something they assume will always be available. This does not necessarily mean that everyone around you is intentionally selfish. Human beings adapt quickly to repeated patterns. If you consistently say yes, people eventually expect yes. If you consistently solve problems for someone, they may stop learning how to solve them independently. If you repeatedly forgive the same behavior without addressing it, the other person may conclude that the behavior has no meaningful consequences. Your actions teach people what access they have to you. This is why boundaries are so important. A boundary is not a threat, punishment, or attempt to control another person. It is a clear understanding of what you are willing to participate in and what you are not. You can care about someone while refusing to tolerate disrespect. You can help someone while refusing to become responsible for every problem they create. You can love someone while recognizing that love does not require unlimited sacrifice. The difficulty is that setting boundaries can feel uncomfortable, especially if you have spent years trying to keep everyone happy. The first time you say no, someone may question you. They may become disappointed, angry, or surprised because they were accustomed to receiving immediate access to your time. Their reaction does not automatically mean that your boundary is wrong. Sometimes people resist boundaries precisely because the previous arrangement benefited them. You must learn to tolerate that temporary discomfort without immediately abandoning your decision. This does not mean becoming rigid. Healthy boundaries can be flexible when circumstances genuinely require flexibility. The important distinction is whether you are choosing to give or feeling forced to give because you fear rejection, guilt, or conflict. When generosity comes from choice, it feels empowering. When it comes from fear, it eventually creates resentment. Another important lesson is that you do not need to explain every boundary repeatedly. A simple statement can be enough. If you cannot help, say that you cannot help. If a conversation becomes disrespectful, end it. If someone repeatedly cancels plans without consideration, stop organizing your schedule around them. You do not need to deliver a long speech every time someone crosses a line. Consistent behavior communicates more clearly than endless explanations. As you become more selective with your energy, some relationships may change. People who genuinely value you will usually adjust and respect your limits. People who only valued your constant availability may become distant or frustrated. That difference can be revealing. It shows you whether the relationship was based on mutual respect or on what you were willing to provide. The purpose of boundaries is, therefore, not to make people fear losing you. It is to make sure that you do not lose yourself while trying to keep everyone else satisfied. You can remain kind without becoming endlessly accessible, supportive without becoming responsible for everyone, and forgiving without allowing repeated disrespect. When your generosity is guided by self-respect, People are more likely to understand that your presence is valuable because it is freely given, not automatically owed. Constant availability can quietly change the way people perceive your time. When you are always ready to answer, always willing to help, always prepared to cancel your plans, and always waiting for someone else's needs, your presence can become predictable in a way that removes appreciation. This does not mean you should intentionally disappear, play games, or ignore people to make them chase you. Those tactics create insecurity rather than respect. The real lesson is simpler. Your life should not be permanently organized around other people's demands. Your time has value because it is limited, and respecting your own time teaches others that access to you is something that should be treated with consideration. Think about what happens when something is endlessly available. People often stop noticing its value because there is no urgency to appreciate it. The same principle can appear in relationships when one person gives unlimited attention. If you immediately respond to every message, accept every last-minute request, and remain available regardless of how someone treats you, they may gradually assume that you will always be there. What began as kindness becomes an expectation. The problem is not that you were kind. The problem is that there was no distinction between generosity and permanent availability. Having your own priorities changes this dynamic naturally. You may have work to complete, skills to develop, family responsibilities, exercise, rest, friendships, or personal goals. These commitments matter even when someone else wants your attention. Saying, I can't right now, but I can help later, is not rejection. It is communication. It tells the other person that you care while also recognizing that your time is not unlimited. A healthy relationship should be able to survive your availability changing from moment to moment. If someone becomes angry every time you are unavailable, that reaction deserves attention. It may indicate that they have become accustomed to receiving more access than the relationship reasonably supports. Constant availability can also prevent people from developing their own independence. If you always solve another person's problems, they may stop solving them themselves. If you always provide emotional reassurance, they may become dependent on you for feelings they need to learn to manage internally. If you always rescue someone from the consequences of poor decisions, they never have to experience the lessons those consequences could teach. Helping people is valuable, but helping does not always mean doing everything for them. Sometimes the healthiest support is allowing someone to handle their own responsibility. There is also a difference between being dependable and being permanently on call. Dependability means people can trust your word and know that you will show up when you genuinely commit. Permanent availability means they expect access whenever they want it. Regardless of your circumstances, you can be dependable without sacrificing your entire schedule. In fact, protecting your own priorities often makes your reliability stronger because you are less likely to become exhausted or resentful. You should also examine why you feel compelled to be constantly available. Sometimes the reason is fear. You may worry that if you do not respond immediately, someone will lose interest. You may fear being forgotten, rejected, or replaced. But a relationship that depends on instant access is already unstable. Healthy connection allows both people to have separate lives while still choosing to stay connected. You do not need to prove your value by being available every minute. Your value is not measured by how quickly you respond to every request. When you create space for your own life, you become more present when you actually choose to engage. Your conversations become more meaningful because you are not exhausted from constantly giving. Your relationships become healthier because expectations become clearer, and you begin to understand that being available by choice is far more powerful than being available because you are afraid to say no. People learn how to treat you through the patterns you repeatedly allow. This does not mean you are responsible for every person's behavior towards you, but it does mean that your responses can influence what continues. If someone repeatedly interrupts you and you always remain silent, they may assume the behavior is acceptable. If someone cancels plans at the last moment and you immediately rearrange everything to accommodate them, they may stop considering your time. If someone speaks disrespectfully and you respond with forgiveness without any change in the relationship, they may have little reason to change their behavior. Words can communicate standards, but repeated actions establish them. This is why consistency matters more than occasional warnings. A person may say, "Don't treat me that way," but if the same treatment continues and nothing changes, the message becomes weaker. People tend to pay attention to what actually happens rather than what is repeatedly threatened. This does not mean you should punish people or create dramatic consequences for every mistake. Human beings make mistakes, misunderstand situations, and sometimes behave poorly without malicious intent. The important distinction is between an isolated mistake and a repeated pattern. If someone sincerely apologizes, takes responsibility, and changes their behavior, there is room for forgiveness. If someone repeatedly crosses the same boundary and expects you to continue accepting it, the pattern deserves a different response. One of the most difficult parts of establishing boundaries is accepting that some people may not like the new version of you. If they became comfortable with your constant agreement, your unlimited availability, or your willingness to solve their problems, your boundaries may initially feel like rejection to them. They may ask why you have changed. The answer does not need to be complicated. You have recognized that your time, energy, and dignity matter too. You are not required to remain the same simply because someone benefited from the old version of you. Another important principle is to avoid making threats you will not follow through on. If you repeatedly announce that you will leave, stop helping, or end a conversation but never act, your words lose credibility. Instead of threatening, decide what you are genuinely willing to do and communicate it calmly. If a conversation becomes disrespectful, you can end it. If someone repeatedly takes advantage of your generosity, you can reduce your involvement. If a relationship consistently violates your fundamental values, you can create distance. These are decisions, not threats. You also need to distinguish between having standards and expecting perfection. Everyone will occasionally disappoint you. A healthy relationship requires patience and room for mistakes. The purpose of boundaries is not to create a world where nobody ever makes an error. It is to create a framework where respect can survive mistakes and where repeated harmful patterns are addressed. This balance prevents you from becoming either too tolerant or too rigid. When your actions consistently match your standards, people receive a clear message about how you expect to be treated. You do not need to demand respect every day because your behavior already communicates that disrespect has consequences. You do not need to constantly remind people that your time matters because you demonstrate it through the way you manage your schedule. You do not need to convince people that your support is valuable because you no longer give it automatically to anyone who asks. Over time, this consistency changes your relationships. Some people adjust and become more respectful. Others reveal that they preferred your lack of boundaries rather than your actual company. Both outcomes provide clarity. The goal is not to make everyone behave exactly as you want. It is to make your own behavior consistent enough that you no longer participate in patterns that repeatedly diminish your dignity. When you know what you will accept, what you will give, and what you will walk away from, you stop teaching people that your kindness has no limits. Your boundaries become visible through your actions, and your relationships begin to reflect the standards you consistently live by. The need for approval can quietly turn generosity into a form of self-neglect. You may believe you are helping people because you genuinely care, but sometimes the deeper motivation is the desire to feel needed, accepted, or appreciated. You become the person who is always available, always solving problems, always saying yes, and always trying to keep everyone satisfied. At first, this can make you feel important. People come to you for advice, support, favors, and reassurance, and their dependence can create a temporary sense of value. But when your identity becomes connected to being needed, you may begin giving far beyond what is healthy. You stop asking whether you actually want to help and start asking whether someone will be disappointed if you do not. That difference is extremely important. Giving because you choose to is generosity. Giving because you are afraid of rejection is dependence on approval. When approval becomes the hidden motivation behind your behavior, you can easily become vulnerable to being taken for granted. People may not even realize how much you are sacrificing because you rarely communicate your limits. You say yes while feeling exhausted. You accept plans you do not want. You listen to the same problems repeatedly without asking whether the relationship is reciprocal. You forgive behavior that continues to hurt you because you fear that establishing boundaries might make someone leave. Eventually, resentment begins to grow. You may wonder why nobody appreciates everything you do, but the deeper problem is that you have been giving people access without teaching them where your limits are. One of the healthiest changes you can make is learning to tolerate the discomfort of disappointing people. This can feel difficult at first because you may have trained yourself to believe that a good person should always be helpful, but being a good person does not require saying yes to everything. You can care about someone's feelings without becoming responsible for managing them. Someone may be disappointed because you cannot help, and that disappointment does not automatically mean you have done something wrong. Other people are allowed to experience emotions. You are allowed to make decisions based on your own responsibilities and limits. Approval also becomes dangerous when you start changing your personality to maintain it. You may hide opinions, avoid disagreement, or pretend to enjoy things simply because you want someone to like you. Over time, this creates a relationship with an artificial version of yourself. The other person may approve of you, but they are approving of someone you created to receive their approval. Genuine connection requires honesty. If someone only accepts you when you agree with them, remain constantly available, or fulfill every request, their approval comes at too high a price. Another important shift is learning to value yourself even when nobody is praising you. Your worth cannot depend entirely on how useful you are to others. You have value when you are resting, learning, making mistakes, pursuing your own goals, or simply existing without doing something for someone else. You do not need to earn your right to take up space through endless service. When you understand this, giving becomes healthier. You help because you genuinely want to contribute, not because you are trying to purchase affection. You become capable of saying yes with sincerity and no without guilt. Some people may react negatively when you stop seeking their approval, especially if they benefited from your constant compliance. Their reaction can be revealing, but it does not need to control you. You are not responsible for maintaining a relationship through self-sacrifice. Healthy relationships allow both people to give, receive, disagree, and maintain individual boundaries. The goal is not to become indifferent to others. It is to stop abandoning yourself in order to be accepted. When you no longer need everyone to approve of you, you become more honest, more selective, and more peaceful. Your kindness becomes a choice rather than a currency. Your support becomes meaningful rather than automatic, and your relationships become based more on mutual respect than on your constant need to prove that you deserve to be valued. Your standards become meaningful only when your behavior consistently supports them. It is easy to say that you value respect, honesty, loyalty, discipline, or your own time, but statements alone cannot create boundaries. People understand your standards through patterns. If you say disrespect is unacceptable, but repeatedly remain in situations where you are treated poorly, your actions communicate something different from your words. This does not mean you should become harsh or unforgiving. It means your behavior should match what you claim to value. When those two things are aligned, you become much clearer to yourself and to the people around you. Start by deciding what actually matters to you. Not every preference needs to become a rigid rule. Some things are minor and deserve flexibility, but there are certain principles that should not be repeatedly sacrificed simply to maintain peace. Maybe you value being spoken to respectfully. Maybe you value honesty in close relationships. Maybe you need time for your work, family, health, or personal goals. Whatever your standards are, they need to be specific enough that you can recognize when they are being respected or violated. Without clarity, boundaries become emotional reactions rather than deliberate decisions. Once you know your standards, communicate them without unnecessary aggression. You do not need to announce them dramatically. A calm statement is often enough. If someone repeatedly cancels plans without consideration, you can explain that you prefer arrangements where both people's time is respected. If someone speaks to you aggressively, you can say that you are willing to discuss the issue, but not while being insulted. If someone continually asks for favors without returning consideration, you can decide to reduce what you are willing to provide. Clear communication gives the other person an opportunity to understand where you stand. But communication alone is not enough if your behavior constantly contradicts it. If the same boundary is crossed repeatedly, you must decide what action is appropriate. That action does not need to be dramatic. Sometimes it means spending less time together. Sometimes it means declining future requests. Sometimes it means ending a conversation when disrespect begins. In more serious situations, it may mean leaving the relationship entirely. The important thing is that your response matches the seriousness and repetition of the behavior. This creates consistency. Consistency also protects you from resentment. Resentment often develops when you repeatedly do things you secretly do not want to do. You say yes while wishing you had said no, agree while feeling angry, and continue helping while expecting people to somehow realize that you are exhausted. Eventually, you blame them for not understanding your unspoken limits. But people cannot always know what you have not communicated. If you continue volunteering for something, they may assume you are comfortable with it. Taking responsibility for your boundaries means expressing your limits before resentment becomes overwhelming. This does not mean expecting people to read your mind. It means becoming honest enough to communicate what you can and cannot give. Your standards should also apply to yourself. If you expect honesty from others, practice honesty. If you expect reliability, keep your commitments. If you want respect, offer respect even during disagreement. Self-respect becomes stronger when your behavior reflects the qualities you admire. You are not simply demanding better treatment. You are becoming a person who naturally participates in healthier relationships. Over time, this consistency changes how people interact with you. Some will respect the clarity and adjust their behavior. Others may become distant because they preferred the version of you who accepted everything. That outcome can be painful, but it also provides information. A relationship that only works when you abandon your standards is not truly protecting your well-being. You do not need to convince everyone to accept your boundaries. You simply need to live according to them. When your words and actions consistently agree, you stop sending mixed signals. Your kindness becomes intentional, your availability becomes selective, your forgiveness becomes thoughtful, and your relationships become easier to evaluate. You no longer have to constantly demand respect because your behavior demonstrates that you respect yourself enough to act when your standards are repeatedly ignored. Sometimes the strongest response to disrespect is not anger, revenge, or a dramatic confrontation. It is allowing people to experience the natural results of their choices. When someone repeatedly takes advantage of your generosity, you do not have to punish them. You simply stop making their behavior easy to continue. If you constantly rescue someone from problems they created, they never have to learn responsibility. If you repeatedly fix every mistake for them, They never experience the consequences that might motivate change. If you continue giving unlimited access to someone who treats your time carelessly, they have little reason to reconsider their behavior. Allowing consequences to exist means stepping back and refusing to carry responsibilities that belong to someone else. This can be difficult because caring people often feel guilty when they stop helping. They worry that the other person will struggle, become angry, or think they are cruel. But helping someone and protecting someone from every consequence are not the same thing. Sometimes excessive help prevents growth. A person who never experiences the results of poor choices has little incentive to make better ones. You can offer advice, support, or encouragement without taking over the entire situation. You can care without rescuing. This principle also applies to relationships where respect has repeatedly been ignored. Suppose someone continually cancels plans at the last moment. You have already communicated that your time matters, but the pattern continues. Instead of arguing every time, you can stop organizing your schedule around that person. If they want to meet, they can demonstrate greater reliability. Suppose someone repeatedly speaks to you disrespectfully. You have explained that you are willing to discuss disagreements, but not through insults. If the behavior continues, you can end the conversation or create distance. The goal is not to make them suffer. The goal is to stop participating in a pattern that harms you. Consequences should also be proportional. Not every mistake requires ending a relationship. People deserve opportunities to learn, apologize, and improve. The important question is whether the person responds to feedback with responsibility or repetition. A genuine mistake followed by accountability is different from a repeated pattern followed by excuses. When someone takes responsibility, acknowledges the impact of their actions, and makes a sincere effort to change, there is room for repair. When someone repeatedly violates boundaries and expects forgiveness without change, continued access becomes a choice you should examine carefully. Another powerful consequence is simply withdrawing your effort. You stop chasing people who never initiate. You stop offering favors that are never appreciated. You stop explaining yourself to someone committed to misunderstanding you. You stop trying to convince someone of your value. This can feel strange if you are accustomed to earning relationships through effort, but it creates clarity. When you step back, you discover who actually values the connection enough to participate. Some people will notice the change and make an effort. Others will disappear because they were primarily interested in what you provided. Although that realization can hurt, it is useful information. You do not need to hold a grudge against anyone who leaves. Their departure simply reveals that the relationship depended on an arrangement you could no longer maintain. Protecting yourself does not require becoming cold. You can remain compassionate while becoming more selective. You can forgive without returning to the same pattern. You can wish someone well without giving them unlimited access to your life. You can understand why someone behaves badly without accepting the behavior. These distinctions allow you to maintain kindness without sacrificing dignity. Eventually, people learn from what consistently happens around them. When you stop rewarding disrespect with greater access, you create a different environment. When you stop rescuing people from every consequence, they must take more responsibility. When you stop chasing those who ignore you, you preserve your attention for relationships where effort is mutual. The purpose is not to control anyone's behavior, it's to control your own participation. You cannot force people to respect you, appreciate you, or change their habits. You can decide what you will support, what you will tolerate, and where you will place your time. When your actions consistently reflect those decisions, you stop living at the mercy of other people's choices and begin creating relationships where respect is demonstrated through behavior rather than demanded through endless arguments.